Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. It is Wednesday the 13th of April and I am your host Reagan King with my co-host and good friend Simon Barrett. This evening we're going to be talking about a very important subject, a subject that is all too familiar to many of us, and looking particularly at Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. I want to preface our discussion this evening by saying that I've read comments, I've had emails, I've had messages from various individuals concerned that Simon and myself and others are being told to say something that follows a particular narrative, and generally the gist is something to do with the mainstream media, President Biden and other people deemed less than trustworthy. Simon and myself have prepared this program. We have prepared this program with deep insight into actual facts from eyewitnesses. No one is telling us what to say or do on this program. We are not a part of some conspiracy or mainstream media cult. We are here simply, as we do at Revelation TV, to present the truth and to value the truth. I ask that you listen to our interaction carefully, and especially our eyewitness from the town of Bucha as he interviews with myself about the tragedy that we have there. Simon, some grim news. We're talking about undeniable war crimes. Ukraine has been called a massive crime scene.
No, absolutely. And firstly, we only are now discovering what's happened in Bucha, which is a city 30 miles from the capital, Kiev. And there we see that this looks like the biggest war crime, certainly since the Serbian shelling of Sarajevo. In the Balkans War in the early 90s. And once we discover what's happened in Mariupol, we could actually see that the numbers are massive. We could actually see that this could be the biggest genocide that we've seen in Europe, on the continent of Europe, for over 80 years. We have to get into perspective, I think, with this one, because we're getting daily news of what's happening in the Ukraine. It's daily. We've covered it so many times on Behind the Headlines, this topic. But one thing I think we have to remind ourselves is that this is the biggest invasion of any country on the continent of Europe for over 80 years. There are 4 million refugees caused in this crisis, which has led to a huge migration problem out of the Ukraine. And Russia has invaded a sovereign European state. These are the facts. We see that in President Zelensky, whether he's groomed by the World Economic Forum or not is irrelevant. The fact is that he's the president. He is standing whilst everyone else has abandoned him. And without him being president, I doubt if the Ukraine would have actually survived, be able to push back the Russians from Bucha. I mean, we're talking here as well, absolutely horrendous sex crimes being taken place by Russian soldiers. We're seeing that people are being burnt. We're seeing that apartment blocks are being shelled. I mean, these are essentially all crimes that are going against humanity. Now they're talking about the possibility now of chemical weapons being used in Mariupol by Soviet forces. We see horrendous atrocities being carried out by Russian forces, by Chechen forces, and by forces belonging to Belarus. Now also talking about the possibility of bringing in Syrian soldiers to fight in this war. And really, Putin needs to be held account, and so do these Russian soldiers who've committed these appalling acts of atrocities. And if we think for one moment that this is not really happening, or this is some big Hollywood stage, then we have to ask ourselves what actual planet are we on, because it's the same kind of thinking that kind of led up to Holocaust denial. When the evidence is presented before you, but you can't see that evidence.
It still exists.
Of course it does.
And I'm not unaware, Simon, that there will always be people who for some issue, perhaps related to some personal trauma or mental trauma or unwellness, will always deny the truth when it's staring in the face. That's tragically a consequence of sin in this world. I wish I could have a panel of people here.
I only have one more guest though.
Yeah, I know. but like, you know, we've actually had early on, before the invasion actually occurred, we had an interview with a man whose family is in Odessa. Okay, so Odessa, that's been in the news. This man just traveled back into Odessa last week and is seeing what's going on there. Things are relatively calm still in Odessa, but he took pictures and sent them to our this prayer Telegram group that he's been running for a while. And it's undeniable. I've seen the photos, okay? I saw video footage of the aftermath of the rocket attack at the train station, which was sent to him by someone he knew. Bodies and blood everywhere, right? Undeniably, from those eyewitnesses, a Russian attack, okay? I have another man who I hear from regularly in Mariupol, a pastor who's going back and forth, trying to rescue individuals and get them to a safer place. This evening we're going to hear from a man in Bucha. I have friends in Kiev. Across the place, there are individuals. The arrogance and the presumption that it takes to say that we, in our safe little bubble here, know better than these eyewitnesses who are pleading and saying, please pray for us, please pray. Oh, well, we don't really know all that's going on, do we?
And I don't think we can also be neutral in this. There can't be any neutrality, because what the Ukrainian people are up against is pure evil. We've exposed this on Enough Behind the Headlines. We did a program last April, almost a year ago, talking about how Putin was planning an invasion then with 40 or 50,000 troops on the Ukraine's borders. So we kind of had our eyes on the radar screen and knew this was coming. But effectively, if we realise what some of the Russian soldiers have carried out, it's just absolutely horrific. It's barbaric. It's evil. And what Putin is doing is evil. Whether he is a globalist or not, and is not playing this globalist game that Biden and the others would like him to do so, is irrelevant. Because what we're seeing here is the worst crimes of genocide that we've seen on the continent of Europe for over 80 years, dating back to World War II. And Putin now is amassed so much power for himself that he's a totalitarian leader. There is no democracy or freedom in Russia. He controls everything. I mean, we just, he arrested 150 of his top officers, purged his intelligence.
Protesters in the street against the war?
I'm now saying if you protest against war in Russia, it's a 15-year prison sentence. So I think we have to really wake up and realise, what we're actually facing. Let's turn to some of the facts. So, if we look at the what's happening in Bucha, for example. So the Ukrainian authorities have reported that over 1,200 civilians have been killed in the suburbs of Kiev after the Russian army retreated from their military positions. The latest news is they think that 800 people have been deliberately murdered by Russian forces. We saw that the Ukrainian President Zelensky visited the horror show in Bucha last week, where Ukrainian citizens were found dead with their hands bound and others shot in the head, as the city is littered with burnt bodies. And now the city is a crime scene, and a massive investigation is underway, and evidence of mass graves for evidence of war crimes committed by Russian soldiers. We've also seen that war crime investigators have discovered that women and children amongst the dead in the mass graves at the Church of St. Andrews. And now news reports are suggesting that the Russians, for example, are using chemical weapons against the Ukrainian residents of Mariupol. So we're also discussing the urgent need for the international community to get its act together and to ensure that there are legal prosecutions that start coming away, and maybe the International Criminal Court in The Hague should stop its obsession with Israel and actually deal with real war crimes such as Putin and his forces have committed. I mean, it's interesting as well to know that I was looking earlier today at the city of Bucha to understand a little bit more about where its location is, a little bit more about the city. So this is Bucha is a Ukrainian city that's just 30 miles outside of Kiev, in a place called Oblast area. So it's a very posh residential area where many of them commute into the Ukraine city centre for work. Their population before the war was 36,971, and also saw pictures of like big, beautiful parks with dinosaurs placed in the park. And you could think that this could be any city or any town in the UK, and to think that what that city has gone through is absolutely horrific.
So you already mentioned that there have been 1,200 civilians who've died in this, 800 likely deliberately murdered. Even if no more mass graves are uncovered in Ukraine, the massacre at Bucha would be the worst in Europe since Srebrenica in 1995, where 8,000 Bosnian men and boys were killed by Serbs. And this happened under the watch of the United Nations, who declared the town a safe area. Some 6,800 victims were later identified through DNA analysis of body parts, and their deaths were prosecuted as murder. This is what's been said of the Bucha massacre. We brought the dead here because the dogs were trying to eat them. Under the domes of the Church of St. Andrew, Provinciano, All Saints, is an open trench 45 feet long, filled with at least 60 bodies. Imagine that. I mean, we're not even talking about having a graceful burial or anything. Loved ones will never see the bodies of their loved ones or be able to lay them to rest in a respectful manner. They don't even have that basic right. They're placed there so that the dogs don't devour them, as doubtless they're starving as well. According to Andrei Holovan, the priest of the church, locals had used the makeshift grave to bury their own after morgues and cemeteries filled up because of the number of casualties. Some claim the Russians had dug the graves to hide the murders, although this has been disputed. It's been alleged that when Russian soldiers came across the area, they then began dumping victims into the grave. For Father Holovan, one of the hardest parts of all these deaths is that his parish has not been able to identify most of the bodies and cannot therefore lay them to rest in a normal, suitable manner. They remain in the trench, some of them in black plastic bags, others beneath the sand and clothes they were wearing when they died. We brought people here from the streets because the dogs were trying to eat the bodies, Father Holovan told the Daily Telegraph. The hospital near here has run out of space. There was no space in the morgue. Now a lot of relatives are searching for their family members, but we couldn't see a lot of the faces due to injuries. A short drive from the church is a nondescript building in the remains of an industrial park. It became Russia's headquarters to plan their reign of terror against the civilians of Bucha. Simon, as we look at this, it's just, I've seen the pictures, you've seen the pictures, I'm sure, total havoc and devastation.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Bosnian conflict in the early 90s, just kind of mass bodies just dug in shallow graves, as we see there in Bucha one. And what was extraordinary is about 6, maybe 2 months ago, that city was just a normal city, like any other city. But of course, with the onset of the Russian invasion, everything changed, and these horrific atrocities were committed, acts of genocide and crimes against humanity, and this is why need to be addressed. So let's have a look now. We are live, we are interactive tonight, so I'd love to know your thoughts. Please email into the program, please send a text message into the program. Your thoughts on Russia committing war crimes against the Ukrainian people in the Ukraine. Let's go to these 2 excellent CBN news reports that look at some of the atrocities being committed in the Ukraine by Russian forces, even reports that chemical weapons could also be used against the Ukrainians in Mariupol.
The world is beginning to literally see the devastation left by Russia's invasion into Ukraine. The port city of Mariupol is in ruins, with Russian shelling destroying 90% of its infrastructure and leaving 5,000 people dead. Now, about 160,000 are trapped with no electricity, communications, heat, or water. The mayor says Russian forces have turned the city into a death camp. My husband says we will not leave, says this woman. Some brutal photos released by the governor of the Donetsk region, who says this is an attack on a humanitarian aid center. And in Bucha, outside of Kiev, British authorities say Russian troops left civilian bodies on the ground for at least 10 days before they left the city.
We have seen the dead bodies of civilians, some with bound hands, scattered in the streets.
The U.S. is vowing to hold accountable those behind these atrocities.
There's nothing less happening than major war crimes. Responsible nations have to come together to hold these perpetrators accountable.
President Biden on Wednesday promising to increase Russia's economic pain with even more sanctions, while the United Nations is scheduled to vote on removing Russia from its Human Rights Council. The U.S. believes that Russia has pulled all of its troops from the Kiev and Chernihiv areas in the north. The president of Ukraine is warning that Russian forces are preparing to launch fresh assaults in the east, warning people there to evacuate and calling on NATO for more weapons. All this as those in Kiev and Chernihiv begin to return to the rubble of their homes, craters left from airstrikes, and other scars of war. Heather Sells, CBN News.
If the use of chemical weapons is confirmed in Ukraine, it could mark a major escalation and turning point in this war. The Pentagon says it's closely monitoring the unconfirmed reports. On social media, a paramilitary battalion incorporated into Ukraine's National Guard is accusing the Kremlin of using a drone to drop a poisonous substance in the city of Mariupol. This is a spokesman for Moscow-backed forces in the disputed region of Donetsk call on Russia to use chemical forces in the city. Ukraine's President Zelensky says the statement testifies to Russia's planning of a new stage of terror against his country. NATO's Secretary General has said this kind of attack would totally change the conflict.
And it will be a blatant violation of international law and will have far-reaching consequences.
Meanwhile, Mariupol's mayor says as many as 20,000 people have been killed in the besieged city. On the diplomatic front, Austria's chancellor is now the first EU leader to meet with Vladimir Putin face-to-face since the invasion began. The chancellor calling the meeting unfriendly and tough after raising the issue of Russian atrocities. And President Biden met virtually with India's Prime Minister to discuss limiting Russian oil imports and pressuring Putin to end the fighting.
Helpful insights, as always, from CBN there. Thank you for your interactions already. Kat says, hi, gents, glad you're both well. What can actually be done about these awful war crimes, and how soon? Well, we're seeing sanctions that are being imposed in increasing measure. They don't seem to be doing much of anything.
No, I suppose one thing the investigators are doing in Bucha, and they will be doing throughout the Ukraine, is getting digital evidence of what's happened, compiling a case, eyewitness accounts. So then at a later date, Putin and those who have served under Putin, including those Russian soldiers, can be brought up for war crimes. And this is the hope that will come out of this horrible tragedy, because if we just remember the horrors of what happened in the Holocaust, in the Second World War, prior to that in the First World War with the genocide against the Armenian people, was known as the Forgotten Genocide, and then of course the genocide that Hitler carried out in the Second World War, then of course the recent one in Europe as well, in the Balkans with the civil war in Bosnia, and now this horrendous acts of war crimes that we're seeing in the Ukraine. So that's something that can be done. More pressure can be mounted to get the evidence, and pressure applied to the International Criminal Court in The Hague to actually conduct a proper investigation looking into Russian war crimes, testimonies, and to present the evidence. And there has to be a price. Otherwise, you know, this is going to be the start of other genocides that we're going to see around the world. And let's also remember as well that Putin's intentions was not to stop in the Ukraine. It was to go on to Moldova.
Yeah.
It was to go on even to invade the Baltic states and then press for a conflict with NATO. So he had ambitions to restore the former Soviet Union. So if Ukraine's first, where's next? So it's a similar pattern we saw with Hitler. We gave Hitler this Sudeten land. What happened? He then took Poland, and then we got embroiled in a world war, global world war.
Appeasement never works.
No, it doesn't.
The policy of appeasement never works. It didn't work with Hitler, and it won't work with Putin. And we may at some point figure that out, but I don't foresee us even installing a no-fly zone or anything like that anytime soon, because our leaders are worried about the reality that would start World War III. They're concerned about that.
Yep. So going back to this excellent report put together by the Telegraph, they said that Ukrainian soldiers told the Telegraph that they were confident that the Russians had executed people at this location in Bucha on this industrial estate because they found bullet holes in the ground and the walls were smeared with blood. We see that inside the building, empty bottles, cans of old food, piles of rubbish covered the ground floor, and in the basement were rugs and mattresses lay on the ground, a sign that the soldiers had used the area as sleeping quarters. Richard Weir from the Human Rights Watch researchers said that he had visits on 4 separate sites where Russian troops were positioned in Bucha and collected evidence of possible war crimes at each. He says that everywhere there were static Russian positions, there were dead bodies, he told the Telegraph. The mounting evidence of war crimes is adding force to calls for further sanctions on Russia. And he said with evidence gathered, Mr. Velichenko was hopeful that he could eventually use it to prosecute Russian soldiers and their commanders, even their leaders who had ordered the invasion. He said, I hope the democratic countries that support Ukraine will help organize a court to prosecute those involved.
President Zelensky did visit the town of Bucha to see for himself what happened on the 4th of April. He said he found it very difficult to talk when you've seen what they have done. Mr. Zelensky said that Ukrainian troops entered the liberated town and they were day by day finding bodies in cellars, people tortured and people killed. You can see around what was done to this modern town. That's characteristic of Russian soldiers, treat people worse than animals. That is real genocide, what you have seen here today. These are war crimes and it will be recognized by the world as genocide. You stand here today and see what happened. We know that thousands of people have been killed and tortured with extremities cut off, women raped, children killed. It's genocide. And indeed, you mentioned earlier that there is a track record that Putin has on this. We've seen in Crimea, we've seen in Georgia, we've seen Grozny and Aleppo, where Putin has this long track record, and yet he has continued to be given a seat at the table of the world leaders. And it beggars belief that he has continued to commit these crimes without any condemnation, essentially, up till now. And certainly in 2014, there was little of any international condemnation, and there was certainly not the scale of threat of intervention when Crimea was annexed and with the conflict ongoing in Donetsk and that Donbass region. But sex crimes have been rife. Some of these are the most difficult. I always find it particularly difficult to read of what's been going on. I'll read a little bit here. One woman described how 2 Russian soldiers broke into her house in a village near Kiev. After killing her husband, they raped her while 4-year-old son wept in a corner. Ukrainian MPs have claimed that cases of sexual violence are underreported. I read earlier of a report that had identified 9 young women, some as young as 14, who are now pregnant due to being repeatedly raped and treated as sex slaves by Russian soldiers. It's appalling levels of brutality is how the UN Human Rights Office has described these evils. It's a deliberate tactic. It dehumanizes, demoralizes, it terrifies and destroys opponents. When soldiers rape women, they're deliberately inflicting trauma on civilians that is long-lasting. The scars won't go away. They even last across generations. Landmark ruling of the International Criminal Tribunal on Rwanda was actually the first to recognize rape as an act of genocide, assaulting women's bodies as a way to harm a whole group. It's been used in Bosnia, Myanmar, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Iraq, Kosovo, South Sudan, Ethiopia, indeed, wherever you can think of war crimes and atrocities, rape has been present. In Ukraine, there are nation efforts to challenge the impunity of these sex crimes. Prosecutors are investigating cases of the woman raped after her husband's murder, and all of these will be presented to the International Criminal Court.
I mean, there was one report I read yesterday of how they intercepted a communication between a Russian soldier and his wife. And his wife said, carry out as many rapes as you want, just don't tell me about them and make sure you wear precautions. I mean, that's how horrific this is. It's just beyond imaginable that these Ukrainian people were like us a couple of months ago. And now they've been absolutely violated. The women have been violated, their children have been murdered, and I think we need to wake up to the realities, not only of war, because war is evil, but when you have intentional genocide taking place and war crimes taking place, should cause an absolute moral outrage. And as Christians, we can't afford to be indifferent, we can't afford to be passive, and we need to speak up against this evil and to pray for the people of Ukraine and to make a righteous stand.
Peter says it's difficult at the moment to see how Putin and his accomplices will be brought to trial. However, as Christians, we do at least know that God, who sees and knows everything, will hold them accountable on Judgment Day and will apply the appropriate and perfect punishment. Let's pray that the fear of God will come upon Putin indeed. Satinder says, a crude example I know, but I remember the first installment of The Karate Kid and how Mr. Miyagi correctly said there was no such thing as a bad student, only a bad teacher. As he remarked, teachers say, student do. In the same way, the atrocities carried out by these Russian troops are a reflection of their training and hierarchy. I think it was ex-American President Ronald Reagan who referred to Russia as the evil empire, and how right he was. We have this from Joan. You're an incredible pair. Thank you for being there to tell us the truth. We appreciate you so much. Big thank you. It's a heartbreaking war. I could only weep when I met one of the victims. Bless you, Joan, for that. We have the question, why is Biden still using the Russians as a go-between in the Iran deal? Shouldn't he be kicking them out?
Of course he should, but he doesn't care about that.
Exactly.
He's also selling the latest American fighter jets to Turkey. Doesn't make any sense. President Erdogan, belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood, has been nothing but a force of instability and harm in the Middle East. So that doesn't make any sense either.
Ian says it's so sad they don't care about sanctions. I pray God will raise up an opposer. Wonder, did those soldiers drug themselves to do such evil? And indeed, there is a history of that throughout conflicts. The Nazis did that quite a lot as well. Evil thrives where good men do nothing. Anita says, I was reading earlier, President Biden has described Putin's actions in the Ukraine as genocide. Macron has apparently avoided using the term genocide, and the Russians have complained it is unacceptable that Biden should call Putin's actions genocide. It seems like a bad dream when you see what is really going on. Rape, torture, murder. I feel sick thinking about it. We see they must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. Blessings, Anita. I think with all of that in mind, it's an ideal opportunity to go now to this interview with an incredible guest. Ivan Rusin, who's the president of the Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary, who is from Bucha. I'm joined by Ivan Rusin, who is the president of the Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary. In the past week, I was reading an article on Christianity Today where I came across the work that Ivan has been doing in Bucha, and he's been kind enough to join to share some of his perspective. Ivan, welcome to the program. Would you share a little bit about some of what you've been experiencing in your own hometown of Bucha in the past couple of weeks?
I'm happy to share our story. So my seminary is located 3 miles away from the city of Hostomel and Bucha. And I used to live in Bucha for last 8 years. So war started first day in the city of Hostomel because there is a airport which Russians wanted to take over. And after that, I was locked down in my basement in my block of flats for 5 days because I had no way to get out from Bucha to my seminary. So this is how the war started. And from that moment, we are involved in humanitarian relief ministry, helping people in Kiev. And after Bucha, Hostomel, and Irpin, they became free from Russian powers, Russian army. We are doing relief ministry in these cities. So every day we are delivering food, medicine, water to these locations. And this is how we serve at this moment.
Even in this season, we have seen some horrifying video footage just in the past week from Bucha, particularly some very grim and grotesque scenes of extreme depravity visited on civilians, stories of individuals being raped, murdered with their hands tied behind their backs, and their houses and all of their belongings looted. And yet I still come across this idea that in some way, somehow, despite all the evidence, the Russians are not responsible. In some way, this is not an atrocity rooted in Kremlin aggression. What would you say to someone who would present that idea to you?
I still have to be polite answering such questions. This war has not been provoked by Ukraine. Absolutely. When I analyze everything we saw from Russian TV, there was a very strong propaganda against Ukraine, against Ukrainians for last at least 2 years. And when I see what Russian army done for my city and other cities, when I hear stories of people that went through hell, I am speechless. The problem with this war is that Russia considered Ukrainian independence, Ukrainian values, style of life as a threat. So they are trying to destroy entire nation. In my city, in Bucha, you will not find a house which was not looted by Russian forces, including my own apartment. Of course, you will ask me, how do I know that it was Russians? I know because a Russian soldier left his coat in my apartment. Some say, like, for example, they did not want to take a monitor that I used to work, so they destroyed it. So I heard, this is what I am a witness of that. I heard and I recorded stories of elderly women in my neighborhood, how Russian soldiers entered the apartment and put a gun to her head and forced to show value things that she has. Another story from the city of Borodyanka we visited 2 days ago. An elderly woman shared a story about her grandson. They took his clothes away trying to find a tattoo. So he had one tattoo which has no connection to Ukrainian army or anything else. And he was heavily, brutally beaten just because of that. I heard stories and I saw those graves. In the city of Hostomel, a lady came to us and we didn't ask her to share her story. She just started to share her story that her husband was killed and she buried him in the backyard. 2022 outside, and she started to cry. So violence that we witness is extreme. So I want to be clear as much as I can. Our message to Russia, leave us alone. If you want to rebuild Soviet Union, may God bless you, but do it within your borders. We don't care what you want to do within your borders. We have different values. We want to have different future. So we do not care about Russia. We have no ideas, no plans to use force to retake Donetsk or Donbass. So this is absolutely unprovoked war. And Ukrainian nation is suffering. I am involved in the relief ministry right now. I am visiting remote villages and I see elderly people left behind without electricity, without provision. But you know what? I have to tell you, I see a lot of tears, pain and suffering, but I don't see fear. Only a few times people ask me why this is happening. I have never heard the question where God is at this moment. Many people, they were sharing how they pray hard during shelling. And it seems that Ukrainians get more faith in God than before the war. 2 days ago, I was in my block of flats, which was every flat is looted, doors are broken, and it's a seven-store building. And in one apartment, an elderly lady, her name is Maya. She told me that she is an atheist, and when I am visiting those cities, I have a collar so people can see that I am a priest. And I was speaking with her, and she knew that I am a Christian, I am a priest. And she told me that she is an atheist, but she said, when we were in basement in darkness, there was one lady, and she had an icon, and she lost it when evacuation was happening. And she said, I think that icon is very precious for that lady. Can you please write somewhere and inform people that I have this icon and I want to return this icon to that lady? She is an atheist. So we have a lot of stories like this, and we are wounded as a nation. But when I see collaboration, partnership of people, civilians and military, I definitely see that Ukraine has a future. So we can speak a lot about who is our neighbor. And sometimes people are asking me, okay, you belong to this denomination, Ukrainian Evangelical Church. Do you support only your people? No, because now every Ukrainian is my neighbor. So Ukraine is united as never before. Another irony that Russians, they will understand and they will cry when they will understand this. The east part of Ukraine speaks Russian, they are, they have strong connection with Russian. These cities suffers the most. If Putin wants to liberate Russian-speaking society, he is doing the opposite. The opposite. Look what happened yesterday in city of Kramatorsk. I was in Bucha riding my bicycle when it was under Russians. I saw cars destroyed by bullets. I saw killed people. So I am 100% confident that time will come when Russian society will learn what truly happened. But I don't know how they will explain to themselves, because this phrase, we didn't know, will not work. Today, in 21st century, you can get information if you want to get. So this is a wild, full-scale war when civilians are target. I saw hundreds and hundreds civilians, buildings completely destroyed. In that area, there is nothing related to military or police, but those buildings are destroyed. So this is wild, unprovoked war. Ukraine would never attack Russia. Ukraine would never try to free Donetsk or Donbass using military powers. So this is my perspective, and I live in Kiev from the first day of the war. I see people that suffering every day. I hear these stories. And I want to be very clear. In city of Borodyanka, an elderly lady, I recorded my dialogue with her. Few times she said Germans were gentles, more gentle. Nazis that came in the Second World War, they were more human than Russian forces. This is what she said. I'm sorry for emotions, but...
No, please, these are emotional times, and I'm thankful for your honesty and for your perspective, and I trust that our viewers will find it helpful as well. God bless you. Now, Ivan, you are the president of Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary. Have you had any students or any faculty who have themselves been killed, or presumably there's a good number who are currently refugees at the moment? Tell us a little bit about what's going on with your students and faculty.
We have 50 full-time workers in our seminary. Only 2 of them live in own apartments. The rest are refugees, including myself. I live in one Christian organization. It is safer in Kiev. For 1 month, I live in the office of the Ukrainian Bible Society. So sleeping in a sleeping bag. Thousands of our graduates and our students, they are displaced people, they are refugees. For several days, they stayed in basements that we turned into shelters. And I can tell you how God is working. It was clear that seminary is in a dangerous place, and we have 70 students on our campus. And how to evacuate them, we don't know. We contacted several people, and some owners of buses said, if you pay me $5,000, I will rescue your people. And I was happy to say, yes, of course, even $10,000, we will pay you, just take our students away. And in 5 minutes, that guy called me and said, no, it's too dangerous. And some relatives of mine who lived in West Ukraine, they tried to help me. So they didn't, it was impossible to find a bus. And then they decided to purchase one. So they purchased an old bus and they came and they evacuate students. And after students, we evacuate a lot of people that we never met. They just came and they asked, can you please evacuate us? A lot of people, disabled people, they were evacuated from Kiev to West Ukraine. So now I think official statistics is about 4 million are refugees that left Ukraine. And our students are around everywhere. But they want to continue education. And I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we resumed educational process of our full-time programs. It absolutely online because our campus is damaged. So we are step by step, we are resuming our ministry and we make different emphasis. Now our counseling department is developing new activities and programs in order to provide trauma healing experience. So this is very important. And also our theology department try to develop, to try to equip our churches to be a places of healing and reconciliation. So we are not stopping, and I strongly believe that Ukrainian church will be stronger and more authentic, and we will impact our nation, not just by things we say, but things that we are capable to listen. And I am a missiologist by my training. I have PhD in missiology. And my mission theology has been significantly reshaped. I taught a lot about incarnational mission, and now I know what does it mean to have incarnational mission. I have been asked many times, why you not left? Why are you here? Very often when we are going through a blog post of Ukrainian army, they ask us, we are amazed that priests are here. And we say to them, thank you very much. And they say, no, we are thank you. I can tell you that when we offer communion in a forest for Ukrainian soldiers, I have never experienced such presence of God's grace and love. I have never in my life. So this is what we experience. And of course, as a seminary, we want to be relevant, and we want to provide good theological, biblical response to this war. And we see clearly that there is no space for populism. And when we hear voices from outside that, we have to be calm, we have to forgive, we have to be pacifist, it brings huge wounds to our souls. So I am very proud to see what Christians of all denominations are doing right now. And level of partnership, we always had a good partnership in Ukraine between different churches, but now the level of partnership is amazing. We have regular meetings, friendship meetings with the head of Catholic Church in Kiev. We have lunch, we share resources with Orthodox brothers and sisters. So it's an amazing opportunity of unity when we are facing such a huge challenge and tragedies that we have right now.
Even it's our prayer that God will keep you, that he'll bless you and guide you in your ministry, that he'll keep you safe, your family safe, your faculty, and the students for whom you're responsible safe. May God provide for your every need. Thank you for joining us today. Since the interview was conducted, I've come to know that one of even students who was on their apprentice program at that particular seminary, his body was found. I've also seen an image of thousands of Bibles that have been burned as well by Russian troops. Kel asks, he says, I teach English online to Russians because English is not or never was my first language. I'm South African. I feel I'm lost in the propaganda. So does Azov not exist? Very, very quickly, Azov has 900 members. It is a legitimate neo-Nazi group, but by no means is a mainstream part of Ukrainian life, and is certainly not something that warrants the atrocities that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and Reagan, that was great to interview Ivan there, because it's so important to get perspectives from Christians who are living and working in the Ukraine, and particularly as he was living in Bucha, that's his city, and so important to get that perspective. Now, according to this, the UK is leading the way in terms of bringing about international legal proceedings against Putin for war crimes. So Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Justice, has offered £1 million to the International Criminal Court in The Hague to bring the process of prosecution. And the Attorney General is working with Ukraine's Prosecutor General to identify and bring crimes against Russians accused of atrocities in Mariupol and elsewhere, and Ukraine's own court system. They said that this work may take years, perhaps decades to complete, says one UK lawyer assigned to the mission, but done properly, it can make an effective difference. And this is what they're saying, that any Ukrainian general, soldier that's been involved in committing any atrocity, if he leaves Russian territory, he can be arrested for war crimes.
I have a couple of more emails here. Rachel writes an email, I won't read it all, but is asking that we just point people to Christ and stop the politics and all that. Well, Rachel, this is Behind the Headlines. It's a political program. We give it a Christian perspective on news that's going on in the world, but encourage you to read some of the writing of Joseph Boot, who has written a book called The Mission of God. And God does care about politics. The Bible is filled with politics, and he cares about what we believe concerning justice in the world. At the end of the day, Simon, we're seeing immense depravity practiced by the Russian troops. We know that God is just, he is a judge, and that ultimately right will be done. At the same time, we have the responsibility to pray for Ukrainian friends, whether brothers and sisters in Christ or not, and ask that there would be peace that would come to this tragic situation.
No, and it's important that justice is done in this situation as well. You know, whether these some of these Russian soldiers that committed some of these acts of genocide or committed horrendous kind of rape, if they don't face the full force of the law in this life, then they certainly will in the next. And that's also, it depends on what value system our international system's based upon. If we have no kind of moral clarity, or if we can't see evil for what it is, then we have to ask ourselves some serious question. Are we indifferent? Are we apathetic to the plight of the Ukrainians? And if so, does that reflect God's heart? I don't think it does.
You're exactly right, Simon. We have to speak up against evil. Evil is not just an abstract theological term. It is something that's practical in his daily life. And it's only through prayer, it's only through effectively shining the light of the gospel into these situations that we can see things change. Another contact in Ukraine said, things will only change when people begin to look to Christ. And that's both on the Russian side of things and the Ukrainian side of things. Things will only change when people know that truth, righteousness, and justice must always be modeled on Christ, not on our national desires or status or empire building. Simon, it's been good to join you on the program as always.
Likewise, thank you, Reagan, as well. And I want to thank you for watching tonight's programme. I can admit it hasn't been an easy programme. It's not an easy programme to put together. No one really wants to actually discuss the acts of genocide that have been committed in the Ukraine, but we have a responsibility, and that's a moral duty to do so before God, because this is evil and we need to speak it out, because if we don't, and we have indifference in our heart, we have coldness in our heart, then we really have to question our own humanity and our own relationship with God. And that's why it's so imperative that we stand with the people of Ukraine, that we pray for the people of Ukraine, and we pray that justice is done. So I want to thank you for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines from ourselves. So thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.